conscious of the time, I'm conscious of the fact that it's running away with us, but I'm also conscious of the fact that you might very well have questions and comments to add to what we've heard so far today. And so really speaking, anybody out there who would like to make a contribution at this stage, please put up your hands. Do we have any roving mics at all? Chaps, there's a sort of, somebody's not saying yes or no, which is very... Thank you. Ah, right, yes. Anybody like to make a comment? Here we are, sir. Thank you.
I think this is probably for Jim Chapman, but others may have an interest. This month saw the 100th anniversary of the birth of Jane Jacobs. And more recently, of course, we've seen Jeanette Sadiq Khan in New York forge green places and bike and busways. Do you think Manchester is doing enough to return the streets to the people? Is doing enough to return the streets to the people?
No. I had a conversation with somebody over lunchtime about this as well. Sit down. Stand up. I had a conversation with somebody over lunchtime about this as well. One of the great difficulties, I think, with Manchester and our industrial cities is that to get them to work with modern communication systems, with buses, trams, and all the rest of it, means a significant investment in the public realm. And the problem is that the word is significant is very important. We tend to have very good ideas, good principles. Roger's described how the busway is going to work down Oxford Road and all those things. But when it actually comes to the investment and when you're going to do it, and if you go back into the 50s and 60s, the tube that Roger was talking about to actually put the train, a link between Victoria and Piccadilly, was disregarded because it was just too expensive. Now, if you think about how London have approached Crossrail, it isn't too expensive because the value is there and they're going to get the return value. We don't invest enough in our infrastructure at the moment. I think, as I said in my talk, I think the work that is being carried out at the moment and the quality of most of that work related to the tram, A, is a lot better than it was when it was first installed, and secondly, it is actually going to achieve, I think, the qualities of many European cities. The problem of getting there is just taking too long. And it's a bit like the way we repair our motorways. If you look at the way they repair the motorways in the States, they close between junctions, they don't put cones and take 12 months or 2 years, with like the M62, to actually get the motorway to work again. They actually invest significantly in the quality and actually get the process sorted out more quickly. We take too long to do that. And that is my frustration. And that generally is to do with cost and because of what is already in the ground, particularly in a Victorian city like Manchester. But I think we're getting better.
He thinks. Anybody else, please? There we go. Somebody at the back. Thank you. Am I clear enough without the mic? No. Oh, you're wonderful.
Right. Oh, that's terrible. This is for Jim Chapman as well. And it was about the title of your talk was slightly confusing because your title was Birth of Northern Powerhouse, but you spoke about the rebirth of Manchester, as indeed have everybody else today, and indeed it's the theme of today. But it strikes to me that there's a jumbling up of concepts going on there. Are you arguing that Manchester is the Northern Powerhouse? Or, as I suspect is the case, Osborne is trying to pretend that the rest of the North can copy what Manchester's done and somehow or other develop, which I think is missing out on the point of the Manchester model and what it has been able to achieve in fairly unique circumstances with a whole number of things, particularly the airport, that make it almost uncopyable and therefore makes Osborne's ideas a little bit of a con.
I was not trying to be political in any way. What I was trying to say, and I hoped I got it through, was that I think the city, because of its invention, its desire to be innovative, as it always has, was actually way ahead of Osborne or even Prescott in thinking about the linkage between Liverpool and Hull and all the rest of things, which John Prescott was talking about 20 odd years ago as well. So what I was trying to express was that because of the strong leadership, the passion that the Manchester leadership and have shown in their city going forward, is that their thinking meant really enabled those things to happen. And if you actually look at after the bomb, Heseltine claimed a lot of responsibility for all of the stuff he'd done in Liverpool, saying, well, Manchester had just copied that. That was a nonsense. Manchester was doing it before Heseltine had even gone to Liverpool. I think it is about the city caring about itself, caring about the future, and that's why I use that title. That, in fact, we didn't need Osborne to tell us that. The city was doing it anyway because the city fathers care about the quality of this place and the communities who live here. So I wasn't trying to be political, and I wasn't suggesting that George Osborne was jumping on a horse that was already running.
I don't think your question was presupposing that Jim was trying to be political, was it? I think it was simply juggling with the same quandary that all of us has, and that is, what exactly is the brand Northern Powerhouse? And I think one thing we can say about it is that, nefarious as it may be, it is extremely effective in doing something. And it's something, incidentally, that the Chancellor hasn't had to pay anything for, which I think is a very interesting concept. When people start talking about things such as Northern Powerhouse, of ways of gathering cities and urbanizations and societies and communities under banners, then they start to go down all sorts of curious lines, some of which stick and some of which don't. Remember original modern. Does anybody else have anything to put? I don't really want Jim to stand up here and be grilled, though I do think it's important that we get some more folk to grill some of the other people that have been with us. In fact, Charles, may I ask you to respond to the point that was being made, and indeed to Jim's response, and that maybe to talk a little further, as you did this morning, about the gathering of communities and how those communities can be constituted. Your example, obviously, was drawn from the Contact Theatre, but that forms itself into an umbrella once it begins to identify itself and its audience. Is that not so? That's all right.
There are a couple of things I'd say. One of the first things I'd say is that there's a really important thing about differentiating between method and methodology. And what I mean by that is that if you can take the component parts of how you do something and then fashion them within another construct, you can get what's required for you and your audience. If you simply follow somebody else's method, you'll make their thing in your place, and then you can't be surprised if it doesn't work. So I think part of the issue with the kind of thing about the Northern Powerhouse is this constant suggestion that there's some sort of homogeneity that needs to be transplanted across them all. And part of what we've been talking about here today is about the myriad things that make up the different identities, I would stress, rather than identity of Manchester. With regard to Contact, it's kind of simple in a way, and that's why it's so complicated. We let the young people tell us. And if they don't like it, they have lots of ways of letting us know. And so that's how that's why it's as diverse as it is. Because they're less constrained by those differentiations that most of us have grown up with all our lives and are worried about. One of the first things that was said by the first artistic director that was there when I started, a guy called John McGrath, was, we quite outrageously determined that we were going to redefine theatre. And there's a whole bunch of people who'd been part of what I would call the theatre world who got up in arms about that. How dare we? What did we know about it? And all we're saying was that the young people didn't kind of want to make judgments about, and this is a text, and this over here is spoken word, and this other thing over here is digital, and this other thing over here is music. They said, we want to do it all or none, as and when we wish. And I guess for me, what I'm getting at is that I don't think, when we talked about earlier, when Jim answered by saying no to the, are we giving it back to the streets, is because I think that fewer and fewer people have agency and or ownership in the decision making. I don't know whether that answers the question, but that I think is what underpins why we have some of the debates and discussions we start. Because something is imposed on you, and you don't feel you had enough of a say about it, so your starting point is almost always going to be from and I don't like that bit.
Thank you, Charles. You did things well there. Thank you. We're just going to take one more question from Dominic, and then, if I may say, when Dominic has given his question and we've made some response, then...
I mean, there's too much to talk about, isn't there? But just some quick points. One is I quite like the digital things, but the Oxford Road thing, to me, the easiest way of solving it was just to get rid of all the empty buses that wander up and down there all the time. Just a quick observation. The other one was, John, I think that is an important point about the city and, Manchester kind of instigated capitalism and consumerism. I think it has to look at how it could lead the redress that balance and, going from a world of consumerism to one more of more compassion. The one about groups of people, I do think that the city forgets that, in a way, there was lots of initiatives, the Phoenix initiative, industrial initiatives, but it's actually the kind of underground culture that kind of dragged the city up, what Luke was alluding to, and groups of ragtag bags of people doing nutty things in Hume, a lawless free zone where you were kind of feral, but it was the kind of that cultural output changed the city and helped regenerate it. And I do think we need to kind of redress that, and also going back to the whole thing of sanitising and taking over our public spaces. There is a great danger of that. There is nowhere, even in the Northern Quarter, and I was involved in the original thing, to me it's been commodified and consumerised and things. So where are those kind of no-free zones where kids can kind of do something that makes things new? And I'm just worried about the sanitisation of our city. We've had Gunchester, we've had Manchester, I think we've got Bland and Branchester coming along, and the plastic people of the spinning fields, etc., clearing the homeless off the streets, all that. I could go on, but there's a kind of load of stuff to think about there, I think.
And I might tell you, Dominic is a famous worrier. I was going to say, Dominic, before your very pleasant intervention, which I'm sure we can go on to discuss in a moment, I must just make the note. Please, can we get along and get some coffee and tea and what have you? And then bring whatever it is your choice back to your seats, and we'll simply carry on talking until we get to the next phase of the afternoon. So if you want to just make your way gradually for some tea and coffee, then please do, but please bring them back here and we'll carry on with our discussion. Thank you. Today, which involves Jason Pryor, Ian Simpson and Martha Schwartz. I'd just like to take up where we left off just before coffee, and that was with Dominic Sagar's observations towards the back of the room. And Dominic challenged a lot the notion of sanitisation and privatisation. And I'm going to presume by that, Dominic, that you were referring to the privatisation of otherwise public or semi-public space in the city. And if there's anything you want to add to that, can we find the microphone again, please? It's coming. Yeah. There we are. Yes, Dominic, please.
I realise that investment is good and the city needs that, but I kind of question at what cost, and the fact that to cite a case, the city spent hundreds of thousands of pounds on changing the law about camping in the city and removing homeless people. They spent lots of money on bailiffs and solicitors to remove the homeless people from under the Mancunian Way. Now looks like there's some kind of cage fighters fighting ground there now. I just think you could be more creative with the money, you know, it could have cost 10 grand instead of hundreds of thousands of pounds. Get a little campsite, have a little community campsite, you know, toilets. I know there's bigger issues than that, but it's just how we approach things more creatively. I'm not against investment.
Can we just hold it there a minute? Because I don't think neither you nor I nor anybody else in the room is going to solve the problem of homelessness in the city this afternoon.
All right.
Maybe if we had until 8 o'clock, we might be able to.
I just think there should be more creativity in the approach.
Just as you're saying that, I'm going to ask Luke Bainbridge to add comment to that, for this reason, that when Luke reminded me where I was 50 years ago last night, which was at the Free Trade Hall, listening to Bob Dylan, it occurred to me as he was saying that, that were that last night, I almost certainly, as a teenager, would not have been able to afford to be at that concert. And one of the things that I wanted to suggest that Luke might take up is that music now, as a commodity, is so expensive to achieve in terms of performance that it's become something that's almost cost out towards elites. And I'm wondering, Luke, the reason that I wanted to introduce you to respond to that is that one of the responses to the bomb in '96 was a free weekend festival in Castlefield called Depercussion. And that was quite an important move in terms of the reinvention of the city after the bomb, was it not?
Yes, Phil, you're absolutely right. Depercussion was the first proper collective response to the bomb of '96. A free festival ran by Ear to the Ground in Castlefield, which about 200 musicians and artists and DJs all performing for free. And the entire gig was free, just paid for by sponsors. And that was the collective response from the artists and musicians of the city to the devastation of the Manchester bomb. But just to pick up on 2 points, yes, I completely agree with you that there is a real danger with the regeneration of the city that it becomes sanitised, and these creative spaces, raw spaces for new talent to emerge, get pushed further and further towards the extremities, which I don't think is definitely happening in Manchester now, but it's something you've got to always be wary of. The fact that the Roadhouse has gone, the fact that the Music Box is now a Tesco Metro, these both are very sadly missed in my eyes. But I don't want, music venues and nightclubs in particular shouldn't be mothballed, and they shouldn't be museums. The culture should always be changing. So if we lose the Hacienda and we lose the Roadhouse, that's fine as long as other things are coming along in its spaces. If they go and they're not replaced, or they go and they're replaced by a Tesco Metro or a Printworks, then we really, really are in trouble. And Phil, just to pick on your point about the entry point to gigs, yes, they are hugely more expensive nowadays, as is going to Manchester United. I remember when it was £3.50 and you just paid on the door to get to Manchester United. But one of the reasons for that is because the music industry's changed, and live gigs have become a much more important revenue stream to bands because no one buys new records anymore. So that's one of the reasons that has changed. And just because the whole way of promoting gigs has become much more formalised and commercialised a little bit. So you're absolutely right.
Is there anything that the city should be doing? I'm just recollecting.
Well, yes and no, because I think an underground culture, by its very nature, cannot be paid for and subscribed by a city council or a government. It needs to exist on its own. But it needs to exist and promote itself. But what we can do is make sure that they don't get frozen out. And what we can do is then, I used to live in Cromford Court on top of the Arndale, which was the first kind of residential accommodation in the city centre. And there was no one living even when I lived there 15 years ago, there was not many people living in the city centre now. And now the city centre is just flats everywhere. So what we've got to, when the city changes like that, we've got to make sure that the cultural venues are not affected. We've got to make sure that idiot who moved into Oldham Street, into a flat on Oldham Street above Night and Day, which is a really important music venue in this city and has been for years, he bought a flat above there and then tried to get it closed down and compared to the council because of the noise. If you don't want noise from bars and music, don't move into the city centre. So what we can do is help protect venues like that. Yes.
Thank you, Luke. I'm reminded that And he can correct me because he's here in the room in order to correct me if I'm wrong. I can remember somebody once asking Ian Simpson about issues of solar gain in some of his buildings, and he responded by saying, well, don't stand so close to the windows. Fantastic. Now then, end of the day, let's have a look how long we've got. Approximately 10 minutes. I'd really like some contributions, questions, anything from what's preceded this afternoon largely with regard to Ian and Jason and Martha. And if you want to get up and defend certain bits of the city or challenge certain bits of the city, feel free to do so. Let us know. Question here. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me? All right. Actually, I just wanted to take up your offer about certain parts of the city. Many dilemmas have been raised as to, going forward and the identity of Manchester. Two spaces really fascinate me and concern me, which are the factory development in the Granada Studios and also Pomona Island. And so I was just really curious to know, basically, if anyone who's spoken today has any particular opinions or thoughts on these two particular spaces and the dilemmas they represent.
Is it all right if I say something first, and then possibly Ian might make a contribution to do with the master plan at the Granada site and the ambitions for the factory development. The Pomona site obviously is one side of the Manchester Ship Canal. The very headwaters of the Manchester Ship Canal, it's the Woodham Street Bridge that marks the difference between the Irwell and the Ship Canal. And all of that, all the way down to Eastham, is owned by Peel Holdings, and considerable amounts of land on either side, on either bank of the Ship Canal. So that's in the hands of Peel Holdings, John Whittaker and his developing company. Terribly autocratic. They built the Trafford Centre, they built Media City, extremely active and very contained. So what happens at Pomona is very much up to them. It's been in suspension across the recession. Planning applications are in for a huge number of residences. The one thing that I would say about it is that it is a very large, empty space, very close to the centre of two cities and very close to a waterfront. In other words, it is part of the city that needs to be filled. So much of the city, looking round, the two cities and indeed the boroughs, you don't even have to go out to the suburbs before you recognise that there's a huge amount of empty space, which is what the Etihad and that whole campus around there is to do with, and the sort of things that Jim and Jason alluded to in connecting the city up. So we know that there's a big residential proposal for Pomona, and I think what that does is continue to reshape the city, actually in the direction of Salford Quays and Media City. And down in that, our city is changing shape, and that's going to be another element in the kind of wind-up to that. Ian, could I ask you as master planners for the old Granada Studios site, what you think the ambition for that is?
It's we've developed a master plan for St. John's, very much about extending the more intimate, almost Georgian scale the city through, right the way through to the River Irwell from Deansgate, opening up a piece of the city that has been closed off for many years. OMA, the architects, actually won the competition to design the factory, and that's effectively a big box with an auditorium in it, and they are going through machinations at the moment as to where that might sit on the site and its relationship with the Irwell. But what's the issue that you have with it?
Sorry, I wasn't asking about the plans Sorry to interrupt you. I wasn't asking about the plans specifically because I'm aware of what's going on in Pomona
Okay.
Island and also at Factory. My question more was about the dilemmas they're representing for a lot of people as to the identity and the vision for the future of Manchester. That was more the question I was asking, if you don't mind.
All right. Your field, isn't it?
Not my period, as the historians say. I think that there are all sorts of dilemmas that always accrue to any modification in cities. One of the dilemmas, for instance, with regard to Pomona, I incidentally remember Pomona when there used to be the remains of a DC-9 airliner sitting on the banks that was a really bad restaurant. And there's a great ambition in one part of the city for Bellevue, the zoological gardens and pleasure beach as it was, to be rebuilt at Pomona. I don't think that's the worst idea in the world. As to whether Mr. Whitaker and Peel Holdings would approve that, I'm not sure. But the other thing, of course, is I once, as you may be nudging me towards, I once counted 14 heron standing next to each other in a row in the wastes of Pomona. It's an extraordinary example of nature reclaiming industrial land close to the city centre. And a lot of people again would argue that is a perfectly good use to put that prime land to. But once again, I'm not sure how well that would be received. One of the things that I think has happened progressively over the last 20 years is we've begun slowly but surely, no, not surely, but slowly, to turn to face the Irwell again, to turn to face the water again. And previously, one of the things that we might have done is thought, God, that's such a stinking dead stretch of water. Just park cars by the side of it. There are 3 car parks running down one stretch of the Irwell. It's prime land in these days, and people will actually, you have to pay more to get a river-facing view in a room in the Lowry Hotel than you do one at the back. So that bit of water, the Black River, the first industrially polluted river on Earth, is quite important. And I do think the implications are considerable. I think the implications of high densities down towards the River Irwell behind Granada Studios, and in fact Granada has land on St. John's and Allied London now have land on both sides of the river because that was part of the package. Again, that's a serious reshaping of what the city is. And basically, if in any way we trust our leaders and those people who speak on our behalf through planning processes, then we can only hope that both of those developments are to the good. You look terribly sceptical and unhappy about all of this.
Sorry? No, I'm listening. I'm thinking intently.
Yes, please do. I'm standing on the microphone lead now, Claire.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something about Factory, and I hope it's kind of answering your question a bit. That I think there is a real concern about Factory and our cultural identity as a cultural producer in Manchester. I remember Factory being announced before Home had even opened, and there was the excitement about Home developing as another arts venue, high-profile arts venue. And I think one of the things that's fantastic about Manchester is that we are taking a role on the international stage and being seen as an international cultural city. But I think they're becoming top-heavy, and I'm having lots of conversations with people. And Luke, I think you touched on it, about the grassroots organisations are disappearing, but they're not being replaced. There was no consultation with the community about Factory, another multi-million-pound arts venue. And I work with communities who feel that they're losing their libraries, they're losing their arts centres, they're losing the initial access, that point where you start engaging with culture. And you need to be able to engage with culture to then progress onto valuing high-value art spaces. And I think there's a gap developing, and where we're developing our international artists, The artists that we nurture from communities, Contact does incredible work. I know Castlefield Gallery does incredible work, but there's few spaces. So we build the artists that we as a city then once other cities are saying, we want your artists, rather than importing international artists and creating a high value, high-end arts culture. And I don't know if that's kind of what you were touching on with Factory. And there is, and I hear it a lot, conversations about real concern that there's millions of pounds going into high-end art and building our international reputation, but not supporting the grassroots and developing our Manchester international artists and historians of tomorrow.
Thank you. Fantastic. There has to be room for both. I cannot tell you how excited I was to be in the same room as Gerhard Richter and Arno Pärt in the middle of Manchester International Festival last year. I think there is a spectrum, and I think it's very important that Manchester invites people from all around the world to come and show their skills and their artistry and their skills of performance to us in our place, because somebody has to pull people out of London. So there has to be room for both, I think. And that's about as much room that we've got as we've got in our timescale today. I'm afraid we've already